My phone buzzed at 3 in the morning on Christmas Day while I was treating a car accident victim in the emergency room. Sophie's name appeared on the screen, but when I answered, all I could hear was sobbing. My 17-year-old daughter had driven 2 hours through a snowstorm to attend my family's Christmas dinner, only to be told by my parents and sister Jessica that there was no room for her at the table. She was forced to drive home alone to our empty house while I worked a mandatory double shift. When I finally got home that morning, I found Sophie's tear-stained note on my pillow, saying she felt unwanted by everyone. That's when my protective fury ignited, and I knew it was time for consequences. The moment I walked through our front door after my grueling 12-hour shift, silence hit me like a physical blow. Our house felt hollow, devoid of the Christmas morning energy that should have filled every corner. Sophie's car wasn't in the driveway, and the presents under our small tree remained untouched, their bright wrapping paper looking almost mocking in the gray morning light. I found the note on my pillow, written in Sophie's careful handwriting, on a piece of notebook paper that was wrinkled from her tears. The words cut through my exhaustion like a scalpel. "Mom, I'm sorry I'm such a burden to everyone. I don't want to cause any more problems for our family. I'll be at Dad's apartment complex until you get home. I know you're tired, but I didn't want you to worry about where I was. I love you, but I think maybe Jessica is right that I don't belong anywhere. Sophie." My hands trembled as I set the note down, rage and heartbreak warring in my chest. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Sophie's father's apartment complex, across town, my mind racing through what could have happened. David had been overseas with his new wife for 3 months, leaving his apartment empty, and Sophie knew where he kept the spare key. I found her sitting in her beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, wrapped in the emergency blanket I always kept in her car. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring straight ahead with the hollow expression I recognized from my most traumatized patients in the emergency room. When she saw me walking toward her car, she got out slowly, like an old woman instead of a teenager who should have been bouncing with Christmas excitement. "Honey," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. She felt so small against me, this brilliant girl who had maintained a 4.0 grade average while working part-time at the local bookstore to save money for college. "They said the table was full," Sophie said, quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "Jessica answered the door and told me they had counted wrong when they invited me. She said there were already 11 people and they couldn't squeeze in another chair. But Mom, I could see into the dining room. There was space. There was definitely space." I held her tighter, feeling something cold and dangerous settle in my stomach. "What exactly did Jessica say to you?" Sophie pulled back slightly, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her Christmas sweater, the red one with reindeer that we had picked out together last month. "She said that since you were working anyway, it would probably be easier if I just went home. She said the conversation would be mostly adults talking about things I wouldn't understand, and that maybe next year they could plan better." Next year. The words came out sharper than I intended. "She also said," Sophie hesitated, looking down at her feet, "she said that maybe you working all the time was a sign that our family wasn't really the holiday type anymore, that maybe Christmas was more meaningful for families that could actually be together." I felt my nursing training kick in the same systematic approach I used when dealing with medical emergencies. I needed information, facts, evidence. "Sophie, I want you to tell me everything that happened from the moment you got there. Every word, every detail you can remember." As Sophie recounted her humiliation, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through social media. Jessica always posted everything online, and sure enough, her Facebook page was filled with photos from last night's dinner. My thumb stopped scrolling when I reached a group photo of everyone gathered around my parents' dining room table. I counted the faces 11 people, just like Jessica had told Sophie, but I recognized each person, and my blood began to boil as the reality hit me. Jessica's college roommate from 15 years ago was there, grinning widely next to my father. The neighbor's 22-year-old son, who I had spoken to maybe 3 times in my entire life, was seated in what should have been Sophie's chair. Jessica's cousin's boyfriend, a man I had never even met, was raising a glass of wine toward the camera. But the detail that made my vision blur with rage was the table itself. It was my parents' expandable dining table, the one that had accommodated 14 people at Thanksgiving just 6 weeks ago. The same table where Sophie had sat between her grandparents, helping my mother serve pie and listening to my father's stories about his Navy days. "Sophie," I said, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. "Look at this photo. Tell me what you see." She took my phone and stared at the screen for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with a different kind of pain than before. Not the pain of rejection, but the sharper ache of understanding deliberate cruelty. "They made room for strangers," she whispered. "They chose strangers over me." I pulled her close again, my mind already working through what this meant and what I needed to do about it. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor planning. This was calculated exclusion designed to hurt my daughter on the most important family holiday of the year. "Sophie, I need you to listen to me carefully," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "This is not about you not belonging. This is not about you being a burden. This is about other people making choices that say everything about them and nothing about your worth. Do you understand me?" She nodded, though I could see she was still processing the betrayal. "I want you to go home, take a hot shower, and try to get some sleep. I'm going to handle this, but I need you to trust me and let me do it my way. Can you do that?" "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to you again," I promised. "And I'm going to make sure the people responsible understand exactly what they've done." As we drove home in separate cars, Sophie following behind me, I began mentally cataloging everything I knew about my family's dynamics and Jessica's recent behavior. There had been subtle things I had dismissed because I was busy with work and Sophie's college preparations. But now, with this blatant act of cruelty as context, I realized there might be much more going on than one terrible Christmas dinner. The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital for the first time in 3 years. Sophie was still sleeping, emotionally exhausted from the previous day's trauma, and I needed answers before I decided how to proceed. I started with Maya, Sophie's best friend since middle school. Maya's mother worked the morning shift at the same grocery store where my mother shopped religiously every Tuesday and Friday, and in a town of 8,000 people, information traveled through informal networks faster than any official communication system. Maya answered her phone on the second ring, her voice immediately concerned. "Mrs. Patterson, is Sophie okay? She texted me last night, but it didn't make much sense." "Maya, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did Jessica contact Sophie before Christmas dinner about whether she should come?" There was a pause, the kind of hesitation that told me Maya was weighing loyalty to Sophie against getting involved in adult family drama. "She's not in trouble," I added quickly. "I just need to understand what happened." "Jessica called Sophie on Sunday," Maya admitted. "Sophie was really confused afterward because Jessica told her that your parents had decided to make Christmas dinner just immediate family this year. Jessica said that meant no grandchildren, just the adults, and that Sophie should probably stay home and have Christmas with you instead." My hand tightened around the phone. "Did Jessica say anything else?" "She told Sophie that your parents were getting older and wanted a quieter celebration. Something about how big family gatherings were getting too stressful for them. Sophie felt bad about it, but she understood. She was actually looking forward to spending Christmas morning with just you until you got called in for that double shift." I closed my eyes, picturing my 17-year-old daughter trying to be understanding about her grandparents' supposed need for a smaller gathering while looking at an empty house on Christmas morning. "But then," Maya continued, "Sophie got confused on Tuesday when your dad called her directly and asked what time she was planning to arrive for dinner. He seemed surprised when she said she thought she wasn't invited. He told her of course she was invited and that he was looking forward to seeing her. That's why she decided to drive over there." The picture was becoming clearer and more infuriating. Jessica had deliberately given Sophie conflicting information, setting her up for maximum humiliation. Maya, did Sophie mention anything else Jessica said recently? Any other conversations about family or about me? Another pause. Well, Jessica did ask Sophie a bunch of weird questions a few weeks ago when she picked up her daughter from the bookstore where Sophie works. She wanted to know about Sophie's college plans and whether Sophie felt like she was missing out on things because you work so much. Sophie thought it was nice that her aunt was taking an interest, but some of the questions seemed kind of personal. After hanging up with Maya, I drove to the grocery store hoping to catch Maya's mother, Linda, during her break. Linda had worked at Patterson's Market for 12 years and had an encyclopedic knowledge of local family dynamics, partly because people tended to share personal information while waiting in checkout lines. I found Linda restocking the produce section, arranging apples with the methodical precision of someone who took pride in her work. When she saw me approaching, her expression immediately shifted to one of concern. "Regina, honey, I heard about what happened at your parents' house. I'm so sorry. That poor girl must have been heartbroken." "Linda, I'm trying to understand how this happened. Did my mother mention anything to you about Christmas dinner plans when she was shopping last week?" Linda glanced around to make sure no other customers were nearby, then lowered her voice. "Your mother was in here last Tuesday buying ingredients for Christmas dinner. She seemed excited about having the whole family together. She specifically mentioned getting Sophie's favorite sweet potato casserole ingredients and asked me if I knew whether Sophie was still vegetarian for part of the meal planning. My mother had been planning to accommodate Sophie's dietary preferences, while Jessica was telling Sophie she wasn't welcome. But here's the thing that struck me as odd," Linda continued. "Your sister came in on Thursday just a few hours after your mother had been here with her detailed shopping list. Jessica bought extra place settings, paper goods, and additional chairs from our seasonal section. When I mentioned that your mother had already been in for Christmas shopping, Jessica said something about how plans had changed and they were expecting more people than originally thought." The methodical nature of the setup was becoming apparent. Jessica had waited until our mother finalized the guest list and menu, then deliberately purchased additional seating while simultaneously uninviting Sophie. "Did Jessica say anything else while she was shopping?" Linda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "She made some comment about how hard it must be for you being a single mother with such a demanding job. She said something about Sophie needing more structure and family guidance, and how maybe this Christmas would be a good opportunity for some tough love. I didn't really understand what she meant at the time, but now it sounds like she was planning something." I finished. "Regina, there's one more thing. Your mother called the store yesterday morning asking if we had any last-minute flowers available for a centerpiece. She seemed flustered and mentioned that she felt terrible about some kind of misunderstanding with Sophie. She didn't go into details, but she sounded genuinely upset." I thanked Linda and sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot trying to process what I had learned. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a simple miscommunication. Jessica had spent at least a week orchestrating Sophie's humiliation, manipulating both my parents and Sophie to create maximum emotional damage. But why? What could possibly motivate someone to deliberately hurt their own niece, a teenager who had never done anything but treat Jessica's family with respect and kindness? I thought back to Thanksgiving, trying to remember the family dynamics and conversations. Sophie had been accepted to 3 universities, including one with a substantial academic scholarship. She had been excited to share her acceptance letters with her grandparents, and my parents had been incredibly proud talking about her achievements to anyone who would listen. Jessica's son, Tyler, was a year older than Sophie and had barely managed to graduate high school. He was currently working at a fast food restaurant and living at home with no clear plans for his future. During Thanksgiving dinner, there had been several moments when comparisons between the cousins had come up naturally in conversation, and I had noticed Jessica's tight smiles and quick changes of subject. Could this really be about jealousy? Was Jessica so threatened by Sophie's success that she was willing to psychologically torture a teenager? I started my car and drove toward my parents' house, but instead of pulling into their driveway, I parked across the street where I could observe without being seen. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with before I confronted anyone directly. My parents' house looked exactly as it always did after Christmas, with wilted wreaths on the door and packages of leftover food stacked on the front porch for neighbors and family members to pick up. This had been a family tradition for as long as I could remember, my mother's way of sharing her holiday cooking with the wider community. As I watched Jessica's car pulled into the driveway, she got out carrying what looked like several containers of leftovers, but instead of leaving them on the porch with the others, she loaded them into her own car. She was taking home what should have been shared with the community, including food that would normally have been offered to Sophie and me. That small act of selfishness crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about one Christmas dinner. This was about someone who had decided that she deserved more and we deserved less, and who was willing to hurt innocent people to get what she wanted. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything I had learned, creating a timeline of Jessica's actions and their impact on Sophie. If I was going to confront my family about this, I needed to be thorough, factual, and prepared for whatever excuses or denials they might offer. But first, I needed to understand just how deep this campaign against my daughter actually went. That afternoon, I drove to Aunt Carol's house on the other side of town. Carol was my mother's younger sister, and while we weren't particularly close, she'd always been kind to Sophie and had a reputation for honesty that made her a trusted source of family information. Carol lived in a small ranch house with a meticulously maintained garden and a front porch covered in wind chimes that created a gentle melody whenever the breeze picked up. When she answered the door, her expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern. "Regina, I was hoping you might come by. Come in, honey. I have coffee on." Carol's living room was warm and cluttered with family photos spanning several decades. I noticed a recent picture of Sophie at her high school graduation prominently displayed on the mantel, something that made my chest tight with appreciation for this aunt who clearly valued my daughter. "Carol, I need to ask you about some things Jessica has been saying about Sophie. I think there might be more going on than I realized." Carol poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and settled into her favorite armchair, the one positioned to catch the afternoon light from the bay window. Her silence stretched long enough that I knew she was choosing her words carefully. "Regina, I've been debating whether to call you for weeks. What happened at Christmas was the final straw, but there have been other conversations that didn't sit right with me." "What kind of conversations?" "Jessica has been suggesting to various family members that Sophie is having problems. Behavioral problems, academic problems, attitude problems. She's been very subtle about it, dropping hints rather than making direct accusations, but the cumulative effect has been to make people worry about Sophie's well-being and your parenting." I set my coffee mug down harder than I intended. "What specific things has she said?" "She told your mother that she was concerned Sophie might be experimenting with alcohol because she seemed different during recent family gatherings. She suggested to your father that Sophie was becoming disrespectful toward authority figures and might need firmer boundaries. She even mentioned to me that she was worried Sophie was developing an entitled attitude because of her academic success." Each revelation felt like a physical blow. But none of that is true. Sophie doesn't drink, she's never been disrespectful to anyone, and if anything, she's too hard on herself about her achievements. "I know that," Carol said gently. "Anyone who spends time with Sophie knows that. She's a wonderful girl, polite, thoughtful, hardworking. But Jessica has been very clever about her campaign. She never says anything directly critical. Instead, she expresses concern, asks worried questions, suggests that maybe Sophie needs help or guidance." "Give me an example." "Last month at your cousin's baby shower, Jessica mentioned to several people that she was worried about Sophie's college applications. She said she hoped Sophie wasn't setting herself up for disappointment by aiming too high, and that maybe someone should help you guide her toward more realistic expectations. The implication was that you weren't providing adequate guidance and that Sophie's ambitions were unrealistic." I felt my hands clench into fists. Sophie's college acceptances had already proven that her ambitions were not only realistic, but conservative compared to what she could have achieved. She's also been suggesting that your work schedule is problematic for raising a teenager. She's expressed concern to family members about Sophie spending too much time alone and implied that single mothers face inherent challenges in providing proper supervision and emotional support. The systematic nature of Jessica's campaign was becoming clear. She'd been undermining both Sophie's character and my parenting for months, laying groundwork for the family to accept, excluding Sophie as a reasonable response to manufactured concerns. "Carol, why didn't anyone talk to me directly about these supposed problems?" Carol sighed deeply. Because Jessica always framed her concerns as family loyalty. She would say things like, "I hate to worry about Regina, she's under so much pressure already," or, "I don't want to add to Regina's stress, but I think Sophie might need additional support." She made it seem like talking to you directly would be burdensome rather than helpful. And people believed her. Jessica can be very convincing, especially when she's targeting people's existing anxieties. Your parents worry about you managing everything alone. They worry about Sophie growing up without a father figure in the house. Jessica exploited those concerns and redirected them into criticism of both you and Sophie. Carol stood up and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. She flipped through several pages before finding what she was looking for, a picture from Sophie's 16th birthday party last year. "Look at this photo, Regina. Look at Sophie's face, her body language, how she interacts with everyone. Does this look like a troubled teenager to you?" In the photo, Sophie was laughing at something my father had said, her arm around my mother's shoulders, clearly comfortable and happy in the family setting. Her posture was open and relaxed, her smile genuine and warm. Jessica wasn't at this party, Carol noted. She had some excuse about Tyler being sick, but look how natural and joyful Sophie is with the rest of the family when Jessica isn't there to create tension. You think Jessica has been deliberately sabotaging Sophie's relationships with the family. I think Jessica sees Sophie's success as a threat to her own child and her own status in the family. Tyler has struggled academically and socially, and instead of addressing his needs constructively, Jessica seems to have decided that diminishing Sophie's standing would somehow elevate Tyler's. Carol closed the photo album and looked at me directly. "There's something else you need to know. Jessica has been asking questions about your work performance and financial situation. She's been probing to find out whether you might be struggling professionally or personally in ways that could affect Sophie's stability." "What kind of questions?" "She asked me if I thought you seemed overstressed lately, whether you had mentioned any problems at the hospital, whether Sophie had said anything about money being tight. She framed these questions as concern for your well-being, but the underlying message seemed to be gathering information rather than offering support. I realized that Jessica had been conducting reconnaissance looking for vulnerabilities she could exploit or evidence she could use to support her narrative about our family being unstable or problematic. Carol, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe the things Jessica has been saying about Sophie and me?" "Absolutely not," Carol said immediately. "You're an excellent mother and Sophie is an exceptional young woman. Anyone who knows you both can see that clearly. But Jessica has been very strategic about targeting people who don't spend regular time with you, people who might be more susceptible to suggestion and worry. What do you think I should do?" Carol was quiet for a long moment, considering her response carefully. "I think you need to protect Sophie from further psychological manipulation, and I think your family needs to understand the extent of what Jessica has been doing. But Regina, you should also know that Jessica's campaign has been more extensive than just family members. She's been talking to people in the community as well." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I've heard from friends that Jessica has expressed concerns about Sophie to people at church, at the school, even at local businesses. She's been building a narrative about your family that extends beyond our immediate relatives." The scope of what I was dealing with suddenly expanded far beyond a family dispute. Jessica hadn't just been undermining Sophie's place in our extended family. She had been attempting to damage our reputation and standing in the entire community. I thanked Carol for her honesty and drove home with my mind reeling. Sophie was still sleeping when I arrived, emotionally exhausted from the trauma of Christmas rejection. Looking at her peaceful face, I felt a surge of protective fury that went beyond anything I had ever experienced as a mother. Jessica had targeted my daughter systematically and maliciously, using adult manipulation tactics against a teenager who had never done anything to deserve such treatment. But now I understood the scope of what I was dealing with, and I could begin planning a response that would protect Sophie and expose Jessica's behavior for what it really was. This wasn't just about one Christmas dinner anymore. This was about stopping a campaign of psychological manipulation before it could do any more damage to an innocent teenager who deserved better from the adults in her life. The next morning, I called my supervisor at the hospital to discuss my schedule concerns. As charge nurse in the emergency department, I had access to information about how our staffing decisions were made, and something about Jessica's timing had been bothering me since Christmas Day. Nancy Robertson had been my supervisor for 4 years, and she knew my family situation well. She also had a reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail that made her excellent at tracking the complex logistics of emergency department staffing. "Nancy, I need to ask you about something unusual. Did anyone from my family contact the hospital recently asking about my holiday work schedule?" "Actually, yes," Nancy said immediately. "Your sister called about 3 weeks ago. She said she was coordinating family Christmas plans and needed to know which holidays you would be working. She seemed very organized about it, had a list of questions about your schedule through New Year's." My stomach dropped. "What exactly did she ask?" "She wanted to know your specific shift times for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, whether you might be called in unexpectedly, and whether there was any possibility you could switch shifts with other nurses. She said the family was planning a big celebration and wanted to work around your availability. Did she ask anything else?" "She asked about our policy for emergency calls during family gatherings. She wanted to know whether you would be required to come in if there was a staffing crisis, even if you weren't originally scheduled. I explained our protocol for emergency coverage and how we determine which nurses to call based on proximity to the hospital and specialization. Jessica had conducted detailed research into my work obligations, gathering intelligence that would allow her to time Sophie's humiliation perfectly. Nancy, did she identify herself as my sister when she called? She said she was Jessica Patterson, your sister, and that she was helping coordinate family holiday logistics. She seemed very familiar with your work situation and mentioned that she understood how demanding emergency nursing could be. She was actually quite complimentary about your dedication to patient care. I realized Jessica had used charm and false concern to manipulate my supervisor into providing information she had no legitimate reason to possess. Is there anything else about that conversation that seemed unusual?" Nancy paused, clearly thinking back to the details. "She did ask some odd questions toward the end of the call. She wanted to know about our employee assistance programs and whether the hospital provided any support services for single parents managing work-life balance. She asked whether you had ever mentioned feeling overwhelmed or needing additional support." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that employee assistance information was confidential and that I couldn't discuss individual employee circumstances. But Regina, the questions made me wonder if you were dealing with some kind of family crisis that I wasn't aware of. Is everything okay at home?" "Everything is fine," I assured her. "But I think Jessica may have been gathering information for reasons that weren't actually about family holiday planning." After hanging up with Nancy, I realized Jessica had been building a comprehensive intelligence profile about my professional life, personal circumstances, and potential vulnerabilities. She had researched my work schedule to ensure maximum impact for her attack on Sophie, and she had probed for evidence that I might be struggling professionally or personally. But there was something even more troubling about Nancy's account. Jessica's questions about employee assistance programs and work-life balance suggested she might have been looking for ammunition to use against me in some larger campaign to undermine my competency as a parent. I decided to dig deeper into Jessica's recent activities and called the hospital's security department to inquire about any other unusual contact from my family members. Our security protocols required documentation of all requests for employee information, even seemingly innocent ones. Security Supervisor Mike Chen pulled up my file and confirmed that Jessica's call had been logged and recorded as per standard procedure, but he revealed additional information that made my blood run cold. "Your sister actually called twice," Mike said. "The first call was the one about your holiday schedule, but she called again about a week later asking different questions. That second call was flagged as suspicious by our privacy compliance department." "What did she ask in the second call?" "She claimed to be conducting research for a family legal matter and wanted to access your employment records. She said there was some kind of insurance claim or lawsuit that required verification of your work history, performance evaluations, and any disciplinary actions." My hands started shaking. "Did you provide that information?" "Absolutely not. We explained that employment records are strictly confidential and can only be accessed by the employee themselves or through proper legal channels with court orders. But Regina, she was very persistent and seemed to know a lot about hospital record-keeping procedures. She asked specific questions about our documentation systems that suggested she had done research into how medical facilities maintain personnel files." "Did she say anything else?" "She tried to convince our compliance officer that you had given verbal permission for the information release, but that you were too busy to provide written authorization. When that didn't work, she asked about our policies for reporting concerns about employee fitness for duty. She wanted to know what kind of evidence would be required to trigger an internal investigation of a nurse's performance or mental health." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just been planning to humiliate Sophie at Christmas dinner. She had been building a case to challenge my professional competence and potentially my fitness as a parent. "Mike, what happens when someone makes those kinds of inquiries? Are they reported anywhere?" "Any attempt to improperly access employee records or gather information for potentially malicious purposes gets reported to both our legal department and to the state nursing board. We take threats to employee privacy very seriously, especially in healthcare settings where professional reputations and patient safety are involved." I hung up feeling nauseated by the scope of Jessica's campaign against my family. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or holiday drama. This was a systematic attempt to destroy my career and potentially challenge my custody of Sophie by building a case that I was an unfit parent due to professional incompetence or mental health issues. Jessica had used the Christmas dinner exclusion as the opening move in what appeared to be a much larger attack on my entire life. She had gathered intelligence about my work schedule, attempted to access my employment records, and researched procedures for reporting concerns about my professional fitness. The timing of Sophie's humiliation now made perfect sense. Jessica had ensured that I would be trapped at work during a medical emergency, unable to leave or defend my daughter, while Sophie experienced the psychological trauma that Jessica had carefully orchestrated. If Sophie had been devastated enough by the rejection, if she had acted out or shown signs of emotional distress, Jessica could have used that as evidence that I was failing as a parent due to work demands. But Jessica had underestimated both Sophie's resilience and my determination to protect my daughter. Instead of creating evidence for her campaign against us, Jessica had exposed herself as someone willing to psychologically abuse a teenager to advance her own agenda. Now I needed to understand what else Jessica might have planned and how far her manipulation extended into other areas of our lives. Because if she was willing to target my professional reputation and attempt to access confidential employment records, there was no telling what other boundaries she might have crossed in her campaign to destroy my family's stability. Over the next 2 days, I spent every free moment documenting Jessica's campaign against Sophie and me. As a nurse, I understood the importance of thorough record keeping, and I approached this situation with the same methodical attention to detail I used for patient care documentation. I created a timeline of events starting with Jessica's initial phone calls to the hospital and extending through the Christmas dinner exclusion. I gathered witness statements from Maya Linda at the grocery store, Aunt Carol, and my supervisor Nancy. I printed screenshots of Jessica's social media posts showing the Christmas dinner with non-family members occupying the space Sophie had been denied. But as I prepared to write a formal letter to my parents demanding accountability, I realized something troubling. Over the past 6 months, I had sent several communications to my parents that had never received responses. Birthday invitations for Sophie Mother's Day cards, requests for family support during particularly difficult periods at work when I needed help with Sophie's transportation to school events. I had attributed the lack of responses to my parents' advancing age and their general discomfort with modern communication methods. My father's arthritis made writing difficult, and my mother had never been comfortable with email or text messaging. But now, in the context of Jessica's systematic manipulation, their silence took on a different meaning. I decided to test my suspicions by calling my parents directly about a seemingly innocent matter. When my mother answered, I asked whether she had received the graduation announcement I had mailed 3 months ago, with Sophie's final transcripts and college acceptance letters. "What graduation announcement, dear?" my mother asked, sounding genuinely confused. "I haven't received anything like that from you. Are you sure you sent it to the right address?" I had hand-addressed the envelope myself and personally dropped it in the mailbox at the post office to ensure delivery. "Mom, what about the Mother's Day card Sophie and I sent in May? Did you receive that?" Another pause. "Regina, I hate to say this, but I haven't received any cards or letters from you in months. Your father and I have been wondering if you were upset with us about something, because you seem to have stopped communicating entirely." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. I asked my mother about her mail delivery process and learned that Jessica had volunteered several months ago to help manage their correspondence. With my father's arthritis making it painful to sort through mail and my mother's eyesight deteriorating, Jessica had offered to stop by twice a week to help organize bills, sort important documents, and dispose of junk mail. "Jessica has been such a help," my mother continued. "She's so organized and efficient. She even offered to help us set up a system for keeping track of important dates and family communications, so we wouldn't miss anything." Jessica had positioned herself as the gatekeeper of my parents' communications, while simultaneously feeding them false narratives about my lack of contact and care for the family. I hung up and immediately drove to my parents' house, but instead of going to the front door, I walked around to their mailbox. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Henderson, was working in her garden and waved me over. "Regina, I've been meaning to mention something to your mother, but I wasn't sure if it was my place," Mrs. Henderson said, pulling off her gardening gloves. "I've noticed Jessica at your parents' mailbox quite frequently, and sometimes she takes mail inside without your parents being home. I wasn't sure if that was an arrangement they had made with her, but it seemed unusual." "How often have you seen this?" "At least twice a week, sometimes more. She has a key to their house, so she lets herself in, even when they're not there. Last month, I saw her take a large envelope that looked like it might be important documents or cards. She spent quite a while looking at it before taking it inside." Mrs. Henderson's description matched the timing of when I had sent Sophie's graduation materials to my parents. "Has Jessica ever mentioned anything to you about my family's communication patterns?" "Actually, yes. She stopped to chat a few weeks ago and mentioned how worried she was about you. She said you seemed to be withdrawing from the family and that your parents were hurt by your apparent lack of interest in staying connected. She asked if I had noticed you visiting less frequently." Jessica had been conducting a neighborhood intelligence operation gathering information about my activities and planting suggestions about my supposed neglect of my parents. That evening, I sat down to write the most important letter of my life. But instead of just addressing the Christmas dinner incident, I needed to expose the entire systematic campaign Jessica had been conducting against my family. I needed to provide my parents with evidence that their perception of my neglect was based on manufactured circumstances designed to isolate them from Sophie and me. I started with the Christmas dinner exclusion, providing detailed timeline and witness statements. Then I documented Jessica's lies to Sophie, her manipulation of family members through false concerns, her attempted access to my employment records, and her interception of our family communications. But as I wrote, I realized I needed to be strategic about how I presented this information. My parents were elderly, set in their routines, and had been systematically manipulated for months. They might be defensive or reluctant to accept that their daughter had been deceiving them so extensively. I needed to present the evidence in a way that would help them understand they had been victims of manipulation, rather than making them feel foolish for being deceived. I needed to focus on protecting Sophie while giving my parents a pathway to redemption and restored family relationships. The letter took me 3 hours to write, going through multiple drafts to ensure the tone was firm but not accusatory toward my parents, factual but not overwhelming, and focused on solutions rather than just problems. But when I finished and prepared to mail it, I realized I had another problem. If Jessica was intercepting mail, sending the letter through normal postal service would be useless. I needed to ensure it reached my parents directly without giving Jessica the opportunity to intercept or destroy it. I decided to hand-deliver the letter, but I wanted to choose a time when I could speak with my parents privately without Jessica's interference or influence. I called my mother and arranged to visit the following afternoon during Jessica's work hours, using the pretense of checking on their health and discussing Sophie's college plans. As I sealed the letter in an envelope marked urgent for immediate attention, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. This confrontation would fundamentally change our family relationships one way or another. But Sophie deserved to have grandparents who valued and protected her, and my parents deserved to know the truth about how they had been manipulated into hurting their innocent granddaughter. The letter contained enough evidence to expose Jessica's campaign completely, but I knew that proving the manipulation was only the first step. I needed to be prepared for Jessica's response when she realized her deception had been discovered, and I needed to have a plan for protecting Sophie from any escalation of psychological warfare. I arrived at my parents' house the next afternoon carrying the sealed letter and a folder of supporting documentation. My mother answered the door with a surprised smile, clearly pleased to see me, despite the confusion about our supposed lack of communication. "Regina, what a lovely surprise. Come in, dear. Your father is taking his afternoon nap, but I can wake him if you'd like." "Actually, Mom, I was hoping to talk with both of you about something important. Why don't we let Dad rest for a few more minutes while you and I visit?" My mother led me to the kitchen, the same room where I had eaten countless meals as a child, and where Sophie had learned to bake cookies with her grandmother just 2 years ago. The familiar surroundings made the current situation feel even more surreal and painful. "Mom, I need to ask you about something, and I want you to know that I'm not angry with you, but I'm very concerned about some things that have been happening in our family." I started by showing her copies of the cards and letters I had sent over the past 6 months, along with postal receipts proving they had been delivered to her address. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she realized the implications. "Regina, I never saw any of these. Are you certain they were delivered here?" "I'm certain. And Mom, I think there's a reason you haven't seen them." Before I could continue, my mother stood up and walked to a cabinet near the kitchen window. She opened it and pulled out what appeared to be a small jewelry box. "Regina, I need to ask you about something too, and I've been afraid to bring it up because I didn't want to cause family problems." She opened the jewelry box, which I realized contained the family heirloom jewelry that had been passed down through generations of women in our family. The same jewelry that was supposed to be shared among all the granddaughters when they came of age. "Several pieces are missing," my mother said quietly. "Your grandmother's pearl necklace, the antique bracelet with the sapphires, and the ring set that belonged to your great-grandmother. I noticed they were gone about a month ago, but I haven't been able to find them anywhere." My heart sank as I realized Jessica's campaign against Sophie extended beyond emotional manipulation to actual theft of her inheritance. "Mom, when was the last time you remember seeing those pieces?" I showed them to Jessica in October when we were discussing Christmas gifts for the girls. I wanted to give Sophie the pearl necklace for her 18th birthday, and I thought Tyler's girlfriend might appreciate one of the smaller pieces if they decide to get engaged. Jessica offered to take the jewelry for cleaning and appraisal, so we would know the insurance values. Did she bring them back? My mother's silence answered the question. After a moment, she said, "Jessica told me the jeweler needed to keep them longer for restoration work, but when I asked about them again last week, she said there had been some complications and she needed more time to sort things out." I pulled out my phone and showed my mother the photos from Jessica's social media account. In one recent photo, Jessica's daughter was wearing what appeared to be our family's antique bracelet at her school's winter formal dance. My mother stared at the photo for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions I recognized from my own processing of Jessica's betrayal: confusion, hurt, disbelief, and finally anger. "Regina, are you telling me that Jessica has been stealing from our family?" "I think Jessica has been doing much more than stealing jewelry, Mom. I think she's been systematically trying to damage Sophie's relationships with all of you while positioning herself and her children to benefit from excluding us." I showed my mother the documentation I had gathered about Jessica's lies, her manipulation of family communications, and her attempts to access my employment records. With each piece of evidence, my mother's expression became more distressed and more angry. "But why?" my mother asked. "Why would Jessica do these things? Sophie has never done anything but treat her family with respect and love." I think Jessica sees Sophie's success as a threat to Tyler's position in the family. Instead of supporting Tyler in finding his own path, Jessica decided to try to diminish Sophie's standing so Tyler would look better by comparison. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway looking confused by the serious tone of our conversation. "What's all this about Regina? It's good to see you. How's our Sophie doing with her college preparations?" The genuine warmth in my father's voice when he mentioned Sophie made the situation even more heartbreaking. This man loved his granddaughter and had been manipulated into participating in her humiliation through lies and deception. "Dad, I need to talk with both of you about what happened at Christmas and about some other things that have been going on in our family." Over the next hour, I walked my parents through the entire scope of Jessica's campaign. I showed them evidence of the intercepted communications, the lies about Sophie's behavior and academic performance, the theft of family jewelry, and the systematic manipulation designed to turn the family against Sophie and me. My parents' initial reaction was disbelief, then defensive anger on Jessica's behalf. But as the evidence mounted, their emotions shifted to horror at the scope of the deception and guilt about their unwitting participation in hurting Sophie. We made that poor child drive home alone on Christmas. My mother said, tears streaming down her face. We believed Jessica's lies and we hurt our own granddaughter. My father was quiet for a long time, studying the documentation with the careful attention he had once brought to his work as an accountant. Finally, he looked up and said, "Regina, there's something else you need to know about. Jessica had me sign some papers last month." My blood went cold. "What kind of papers?" She said they were for estate planning and asset protection. She told me you were too busy with work to be involved in family financial planning right now, and that these documents would help protect the family's interests if anything happened to your mother and me. My mother looked at my father in shock. "What documents? You didn't tell me about any papers." Jessica said it would be better to handle the legal details quietly and then explain everything to the family afterward. She said Regina had specifically asked her to take care of these matters because she trusted Jessica's judgment and didn't have time to deal with financial planning herself. I realized Jessica's manipulation had been even more comprehensive than I had imagined. She had been working to gain legal control over my parents' assets while simultaneously destroying my relationship with them and eliminating Sophie from the family inheritance. "Dad, do you have copies of what you signed?" He led us to his home office and pulled out a folder containing several legal documents. As I read through them, my nursing background in medical law helped me understand the implications. Jessica had convinced my father to sign documents that would give her significant control over family financial decisions and inheritance distribution. The papers included a revised power of attorney naming Jessica as primary decision-maker for financial and medical issues, and preliminary estate planning documents that heavily favored Jessica's family while minimizing provisions for Sophie and me. Dad, did Jessica bring these papers to you, or did you go to an attorney's office to sign them? Jessica brought them here. She said she had consulted with a family law attorney and that these were standard documents for families in our situation. She witnessed my signature and said she would file them with the appropriate offices. I realized Jessica had created fraudulent legal documents designed to steal my family's inheritance while manipulating my elderly parents into believing they were making responsible financial decisions. The scope of Jessica's betrayal was staggering. She had conducted a comprehensive campaign involving emotional manipulation, theft, fraud, interception of communications, attempted sabotage of my professional reputation, and exploitation of elderly family members through deceptive legal documentation. But now I had evidence of criminal activity that went far beyond family drama. Jessica had committed multiple felonies, and I had the documentation to prove it. With my parents finally understanding the scope of Jessica's manipulation, I presented them with the formal letter I had prepared. But given everything we had discovered during our conversation, the letter felt almost insufficient to address the magnitude of what we were dealing with. Mom, Dad. I wrote this letter before I knew about the stolen jewelry and the fraudulent legal documents. Now I realize we're not just dealing with family conflict. We're dealing with criminal activity that could have destroyed our family's financial security and Sophie's future. My father read the letter aloud, his voice growing more strained with each paragraph. When he finished, he set it down and looked at both my mother and me with an expression of profound shame. Regina, your mother and I have failed Sophie terribly. We allowed ourselves to be manipulated into hurting an innocent child who has never done anything but bring joy and pride to our family. Dad, Jessica is very skilled at manipulation. She spent months building false narratives and creating situations that would make her lies seem believable. You're not responsible for being deceived by someone you trusted. But even as I spoke the words, I knew my parents would carry guilt about their role in Sophie's humiliation. The important thing now was ensuring they understood the full truth and were committed to making amends. There's something else, my father said quietly. Jessica brought more papers for me to sign just yesterday. She said they were additional estate planning documents that needed to be filed before the end of the year for tax purposes. My mother and I looked at each other in alarm. Did you sign them? I asked. No, I told her I wanted to read them more carefully first. She seemed upset and said there was a deadline, but something about her urgency made me uncomfortable. The papers are in my desk drawer. My father retrieved a thick envelope containing what appeared to be comprehensive legal documents, transferring significant assets and decision-making authority to Jessica. The papers included language that would have made Jessica the primary beneficiary of my parents' estate, while reducing Sophie's inheritance to a minimal amount. Dad, these documents would have essentially disinherited Sophie and given Jessica control over everything. If you had signed these, Sophie would have been left with almost nothing from her grandparents' estate. But Jessica told me these were necessary to protect the family from potential legal challenges. She said that because you were a single mother with demanding work responsibilities, there could be complications with estate administration that these documents would prevent. I realized Jessica had been racing to complete her theft of the family inheritance before her other manipulations could be discovered. The Christmas dinner humiliation might have been intended as a distraction, while she pressured my father into signing away Sophie's financial future. Regina, my mother said, we need to call Jessica immediately and demand that she return the jewelry and explain these documents. Actually, Mom, I think we need to be more strategic about how we handle this. Jessica has committed multiple crimes and she's demonstrated that she's willing to hurt Sophie to protect herself. We need to document everything properly and involve appropriate authorities." My father looked confused. "Authorities? You mean police?" "Jessica has stolen family property, created fraudulent legal documents, and attempted to defraud elderly family members. Those are felonies. She's also engaged in harassment and stalking behaviors regarding my employment situation. This isn't something we can resolve through family conversations." Just then, we heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jessica's SUV parking behind my car. My mother looked panicked. "She must have seen your car here and decided to check on what we're discussing," my mother said. "Mom, Dad, I need you to follow my lead here. We have evidence of criminal activity, but I don't want to confront Jessica directly until we've consulted with attorneys and law enforcement. Let me handle this conversation." Jessica knocked on the front door and let herself in with her key, calling out cheerfully as if her visit was completely normal. "Mom, Dad, I saw Regina's car outside. I hope everything is okay." She walked into the kitchen with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed she was carrying another envelope likely containing additional fraudulent documents for my father to sign. "Jessica," I said calmly, "we were just discussing some family communication issues. Mom and Dad mentioned they haven't been receiving cards and letters I've been sending." Jessica's expression flickered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Oh, that's strange. I've been helping with their mail organization, but I haven't seen anything from you. Maybe there's been some kind of postal service mix-up. We were also discussing the family jewelry that Mom has been missing. She mentioned you had taken some pieces for cleaning and appraisal." This time Jessica's pause was longer and I could see her calculating her response. "Yes, the jeweler has been taking longer than expected. There were some complications with the restoration work." My father held up the unsigned legal documents. "Jessica Regina has been explaining some concerns about these papers you brought me to sign. I think we should discuss them with the whole family before I complete any legal documents." Jessica's carefully maintained facade began to crack. She looked at the documents, then at me, then back at my parents. I could see her realizing that her campaign of manipulation had been exposed. "I don't understand what the problem is," Jessica said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "I've been trying to help this family stay organized and protected. If Regina has issues with how I've been helping, maybe she should have been more involved herself instead of being too busy with work all the time." "Jessica?" I said quietly, "We know about the intercepted mail. We know about the lies you told Sophie about Christmas dinner. We know about the jewelry, and we know about your attempts to access my employment records at the hospital." Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her decide whether to continue denying or to change tactics entirely. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly hard and cold. "You want to know the truth? I was trying to protect this family from the damage you're doing to it. Sophie is being raised to think she's better than everyone else because she gets good grades and you make decent money as a nurse. She needed to learn some humility, and you needed to understand that your job isn't more important than family relationships." The mask had finally come off, revealing the cruel calculation behind months of psychological manipulation. "You excluded my daughter from Christmas dinner to teach her humility," I asked, keeping my voice level despite the fury building inside me. Someone needed to show her that academic achievement doesn't make her special and that she can't just waltz into family gatherings expecting to be the center of attention. Tyler has been struggling, and instead of supporting him, this entire family has been fawning over Sophie's college acceptances like she's some kind of genius. My parents stared at Jessica in horror as she revealed the petty jealousy and malicious intent behind her campaign against Sophie. "And the jewelry?" my mother asked quietly. "Sophie doesn't deserve grandmother's jewelry any more than Tyler's girlfriend does. Just because Sophie is going to college doesn't mean she should get preferential treatment in family inheritance. I was evening things out." "By stealing," my father said, his voice containing more anger than I had heard from him in years. "By making fair decisions that this family was too emotional to make objectively, Jessica snapped back. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Jessica alternately trying to justify her actions and attacking Sophie's character and my parenting. But with each word, she revealed more about the deliberate cruelty of her campaign and her complete lack of remorse for the pain she had caused. Finally, she gathered her things and headed toward the door. If this family wants to choose Regina and her precious daughter over me, that's your choice, but don't expect me to continue helping with anything around here. After she left my parents and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, the woman who had just walked out of their house bore no resemblance to the helpful, concerned daughter they thought they had known. Regina. My mother said finally, "What do we do now?" "Now we protect Sophie, we recover the stolen property, and we make sure Jessica faces consequences for what she's done. But first, we make sure she can never hurt Sophie again." 20 minutes after Jessica stormed out, her car came roaring back into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched her slam the car door and march toward the house with the determined stride of someone who had spent the drive working herself into a confrontational fury. She burst through the front door without knocking, this time her face flushed and her voice raised before she even reached the kitchen. "I've been thinking about this conversation and I'm not going to let Regina twist the truth and turn this family against me," Jessica announced, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "She's been poisoning your minds with lies because she can't handle the fact that someone finally stood up to her precious daughter." My father stood up from his chair, his own anger now fully activated. "Jessica, you admitted to stealing from your mother and lying to your niece. No one is twisting anything." "I didn't steal anything. I redistributed family assets more fairly because you two were playing favorites with Sophie while ignoring Tyler's needs. Someone had to look out for my son's interests since this family has been obsessed with celebrating Sophie's so-called achievements." The venom in Jessica's voice when she said Sophie's name made my protective instincts flare dangerously. I stood up and positioned myself between Jessica and my parents, recognizing that this confrontation was about to escalate beyond family argument into something more dangerous. "Jessica, you psychologically tortured a 17-year-old girl on Christmas Day. You made her drive home alone in a snowstorm to spend the holiday in an empty house because you convinced yourself that her academic success was somehow an attack on your son. Sophie needed to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her accomplishments," Jessica shot back. "She's been coddled and praised for getting good grades, but she has no real-world experience, no understanding of what life is actually like for families that aren't as privileged as yours." Privileged. I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "I'm a single mother working double shifts in an emergency room to pay for Sophie's college applications and support us both. What exactly do you think is privileged about our situation? You make more money than my husband and me combined. You have job security and health care, and Sophie gets opportunities that Tyler never had because of your professional connections and financial resources." The truth of Jessica's resentment was finally emerging. This wasn't about Sophie's character or behavior. This was about Jessica's own feelings of inadequacy and failure as a parent projected onto my daughter through months of systematic cruelty. "So you decided to punish Sophie for circumstances she didn't create and successes she earned through her own hard work?" My mother asked, her voice shaking with anger. "I decided to give Tyler equal consideration in a family that has been overlooking him while celebrating every minor achievement Sophie makes. Do you realize that Sophie's college acceptance announcements were posted on the refrigerator for 3 months, while Tyler's high school graduation photo got moved to a drawer within 2 weeks? I realized Jessica had been keeping a mental inventory of perceived slights and inequalities, building resentment over normal family dynamics and turning them into justification for hurting an innocent teenager. Tyler's graduation photo is on the mantel in the living room," my father said. "It's been there since June. In a frame that's smaller than the one Sophie's school photo is in," Jessica retorted. "Everything about how this family treats our children shows who you really value more." The conversation was revealing the depth of Jessica's psychological problems. She had created elaborate conspiracy theories about family favoritism to justify her campaign against Sophie, convincing herself that she was correcting injustices rather than committing them. Jessica. I said, trying one more time to reach whatever rational part of her might still exist. If you felt Tyler needed more support or recognition, why didn't you talk to us about that directly? Why did you decide that hurting Sophie was the solution? Because talking doesn't work with people who have already made up their minds about who deserves what. Sophie gets praised for everything she does, while Tyler gets criticized for not being more like her. The only way to balance things was to show Sophie what it feels like to be excluded and overlooked. So you deliberately inflicted emotional trauma on a teenager to make a point about fairness, my mother asked. I showed her that she's not automatically entitled to special treatment just because she gets good grades. Maybe now she'll understand what Tyler has been dealing with his entire life. The logic was so twisted and cruel that I realized Jessica was beyond rational conversation. She had convinced herself that psychologically abusing my daughter was actually a form of justice, and no amount of evidence or argument was going to change that delusion. "What about the stolen jewelry?" my father demanded. "How was giving your mother's pearls to your daughter instead of Sophie an example of fairness? Sophie was going to get those pearls automatically just because she's the older granddaughter. I made sure both girls had equal access to family heirlooms instead of following outdated traditions about birth order." "You stole from your mother and lied about it," I said flatly. "I redistributed family assets according to actual need and merit instead of blind favoritism," Jessica responded. The conversation continued in circles, with Jessica creating increasingly elaborate justifications for her behavior while revealing more and more about the calculated nature of her campaign against Sophie. She admitted to intercepting our mail because she wanted to control the family's perception of my level of involvement. She acknowledged lying about Sophie's behavior because she believed Sophie needed to be brought down to earth. She even admitted to the hospital calls, claiming she was gathering information to help the family understand the pressures I was under at work. Every admission made her actions seem more premeditated and malicious, but Jessica seemed completely incapable of understanding why her behavior was wrong or harmful. Finally, after nearly an hour of circular arguments and increasingly hostile exchanges, Jessica gathered her purse and the unsigned legal documents my father had refused to complete. "Fine," she said, her voice cold with fury. "If this family wants to choose Regina's spoiled daughter over me and Tyler, that's your decision. But don't expect me to continue helping with anything. Don't call me when you need assistance with medical appointments or household maintenance or any of the other things I've been doing while Regina was too busy with her career to take care of her own parents." "Jessica," my father said quietly, "we love you, but what you did to Sophie was wrong. We hope you can get the help you need to understand that." "The only help I need is protection from a family that has never appreciated anything I've done while worshiping Regina and her perfect daughter," Jessica replied. "Tyler and I will be fine without you." She slammed the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, and we heard her car tires squeal as she backed out of the driveway and drove away. My parents and I sat in the aftermath of the confrontation, emotionally drained and horrified by the glimpse into Jessica's mindset. The woman who had just left their house was someone they didn't recognize, someone capable of justifying cruelty through elaborate self-deception and victim narratives. "Regina." My mother said finally, "I don't think Jessica is going to voluntarily return the jewelry or acknowledge that what she did was wrong." "No, she's not," I agreed. "And I don't think this is over. Someone who can rationalize psychologically abusing a teenager isn't going to accept losing control of this situation peacefully." "What do you think she'll do next?" I thought about Jessica's pattern of behavior over the past few months, her systematic approach to manipulation, and her escalating tactics when previous methods didn't achieve her desired results. I think she's going to try to destroy our family's reputation in the community, attack my professional credibility, and find new ways to hurt Sophie. Someone who has invested this much effort in a campaign of manipulation isn't going to just walk away because she's been exposed. My father looked worried. Can we protect Sophie from whatever Jessica might do next? We can and we will, I promised. But first we need to document everything that's happened and involve the appropriate authorities. Jessica has committed crimes, and she's demonstrated that she's a continuing threat to Sophie's well-being. We can't handle this as a private family matter anymore. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the office of Catherine Walsh, a family attorney who had been recommended by my hospital's legal department. I brought with me a comprehensive file containing all the evidence I had gathered about Jessica's campaign against my family. Catherine was a woman in her 50s with the kind of calm, analytical demeanor that inspired confidence in crisis situations. She listened to my account without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly focusing her complete attention on the details of Jessica's systematic manipulation and criminal behavior. When I finished, she reviewed the documentation I had provided, spending particular attention on the fraudulent legal documents Jessica had pressured my father to sign. Regina, what you're describing goes far beyond family conflict, Catherine said finally. Your sister has committed multiple felonies, including theft, fraud, elder abuse, and stalking. The scope and premeditation of her actions suggests this could also involve federal charges related to mail interference and identity theft. What are our options for protecting Sophie and my parents from further manipulation? First, we need to secure restraining orders to prevent Jessica from contacting Sophie or accessing your parents' home. Second, we need to report the criminal activity to appropriate law enforcement agencies. Third, we need to reverse any legal documents she convinced your father to sign and secure your parents' assets from further exploitation. Catherine explained that the fraudulent power of attorney and estate planning documents could have given Jessica legal control over my parents' medical and financial decisions, effectively allowing her to steal their assets legally while excluding Sophie and me from inheritance rights. If your father had signed those final documents, Jessica would have had the authority to place your parents in care facilities, sell their home, and distribute their assets according to her own preferences. She was essentially planning to steal your family's entire estate. The revelation made me feel sick. Jessica hadn't just been trying to humiliate Sophie. She'd been conducting a comprehensive theft of my family's financial future. How difficult will it be to prove these documents are fraudulent? The documents themselves are suspicious because they heavily favor Jessica while minimizing provisions for other family members, which is unusual for parents with multiple children. More importantly, your father was clearly misled about their contents and legal implications, which constitutes fraud, even if the documents themselves are technically legal. Catherine also explained that Jessica's attempts to access my employment records and her phone calls to the hospital constituted serious privacy violations that could result in both criminal charges and civil liability. Healthcare privacy laws are very strict, and attempting to impersonate someone to access medical employment records is a federal offense. The fact that she made multiple attempts suggests this was part of a systematic campaign to damage your professional reputation. What about the stolen jewelry? Theft is theft, regardless of family relationships. The fact that Jessica lied about the purpose of taking the jewelry and then gave it to her own daughter shows clear intent to permanently deprive your family of the property. Catherine recommended that we file police reports immediately for all the criminal activity, seek emergency restraining orders to protect Sophie and my parents from further harassment, and begin civil proceedings to recover the stolen property and reverse any legal manipulations Jessica had achieved. There's something else you should know, Catherine added. Cases like this often reveal additional victims. Your sister's behavior suggests a pattern that may have affected other people beyond your immediate family. What do you mean? People who engage in systematic manipulation and fraud often have multiple targets. Jessica may have been conducting similar campaigns against other families or individuals. When we file these charges, other victims may come forward with similar experiences. The thought that Jessica might have been psychologically abusing other families was disturbing, but not surprising given the calculating nature of her behavior towards Sophie. How long will this process take? Emergency protective orders can be issued within 24 hours. Criminal investigations will take longer, possibly several months. Civil recovery of stolen property and reversal of fraudulent documents should be completed within a few weeks if Jessica doesn't contest them. And if she does contest them, given the evidence you've provided, she would be unlikely to prevail in court. But Jessica may choose to fight these charges as a way to continue harassing your family, even if she knows she can't win. I left Catherine's office with a clear action plan and a much better understanding of the legal protections available to Sophie and my parents. But I also left with a sobering awareness of how close Jessica had come to achieving her goals of destroying my family's financial security and Sophie's future. That afternoon, Catherine and I met with Detective Sarah Martinez at the County Sheriff's Office to file formal criminal complaints. Detective Martinez had extensive experience with elder abuse and family fraud cases, and she was immediately concerned about the scope of Jessica's manipulation. The systematic nature of this manipulation is very concerning, Detective Martinez said after reviewing the evidence. Your sister didn't just commit opportunistic crimes. She planned and executed a comprehensive campaign designed to psychologically and financially destroy your family while enriching herself. Is that unusual for family fraud cases? This level of premeditation and the targeting of a minor child make this case particularly serious. Most family theft involves taking advantage of opportunities, but your sister created opportunities through deliberate manipulation and deception. Detective Martinez explained that the investigation would likely uncover additional evidence of Jessica's criminal activity, particularly once they examined her financial records and communication history. We'll be looking at her bank accounts to trace the stolen jewelry, her phone and email records to document the harassment and fraud attempts, and her social media activity to establish patterns of deception. How long before she's arrested? We'll issue warrants within 48 hours for the theft and fraud charges. The federal privacy violations will take longer to process, but those charges carry more serious penalties. I drove home that evening knowing that within days Jessica would be facing criminal charges for her campaign against my family. But I also knew that the legal process was just beginning, and that protecting Sophie from any escalation of Jessica's behavior would require continued vigilance and careful planning. The most important immediate step was securing the restraining orders that would legally prevent Jessica from contacting Sophie or entering my parents' property. But beyond the legal protections, I needed to help Sophie and my parents heal from the psychological trauma of discovering how completely they had been manipulated by someone they trusted. 2 days after filing the criminal complaints, I received an unexpected call at work from Janet Morrison, the director of the hospital's legal department. She asked me to meet with her immediately regarding what she described as a serious security matter involving your family. I found Janet in her office reviewing a thick file that I soon learned contained detailed documentation of Jessica's attempts to access my employment information and compromise my professional reputation. Regina, we've been conducting an internal investigation triggered by your sister's suspicious inquiries about your employment status, Janet began. What we've discovered goes far beyond inappropriate curiosity about your work schedule. She opened the file and showed me printed records of multiple phone calls Jessica had made to various departments within the hospital system over a period of 6 weeks. Your sister didn't just call once or twice asking about your schedule. She made 14 separate attempts to access confidential information about your employment, your patient care reviews, your disciplinary history, and your psychological fitness evaluations. My hands started shaking as I realized the scope of Jessica's professional sabotage campaign. What kind of information was she trying to access? She called Human Resources claiming to be conducting a background check for a family legal matter. She contacted Patient Safety, claiming she had concerns about your mental health affecting patient care. She even called our employee assistance program pretending to be you, asking for records of any counseling or support services you might have used. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just been manipulating my family relationships, she had been actively trying to destroy my career and professional reputation. She also contacted the state nursing board, Janet continued. She filed a formal complaint claiming that you were experiencing personal stress that was affecting your job performance and that the hospital was not properly monitoring your fitness for duty. Did the nursing board investigate her complaint? They initiated a preliminary review, but when they contacted us for verification, we became suspicious of the complaint's origin and motivation. The specific allegations didn't match any actual concerns about your performance, and the complaint contained personal information that wouldn't normally be available to someone genuinely concerned about patient safety. Janet explained that the hospital's security department had flagged Jessica's activities as a potential stalking and harassment case, particularly when they realized she had been using different names and phone numbers to make multiple inquiries about the same employee. We also discovered that your sister attempted to access the hospital's online employee portal using what appeared to be stolen login credentials. Our IT security team traced the attempts to her home computer and identified multiple failed attempts to guess your password. The systematic nature of Jessica's attack on my professional life was staggering. While she had been manipulating my family relationships and stealing from my parents, she'd simultaneously been conducting a campaign to destroy my career and professional credibility. Janet, could her actions have actually succeeded in damaging my employment status? If we hadn't been vigilant about verifying the source of the complaints, yes. A formal investigation by the state nursing board based on her false allegations could have resulted in suspension of your license while the claims were investigated. Even unfounded complaints can take months to resolve and can appear on professional background checks. I realized Jessica's plan had been comprehensive: destroy my family relationships, steal the family inheritance, and eliminate my ability to support Sophie by sabotaging my nursing career. If all three elements had succeeded, Sophie would have been left with no family support, no inheritance, and a mother unable to provide financial stability. "There's more," Janet said grimly. "We believe your sister may have attempted similar campaigns against other healthcare workers in our system. When we started investigating her activities, we discovered complaints against 3 other nurses that followed similar patterns of personal allegations disguised as professional concerns. Other people, 3 single mothers working in our emergency and intensive care departments, all highly competent professionals, all recently divorced or widowed, all with children approaching college age. The complaints against them contained similar language and accusations about personal stress affecting professional performance. The implications were horrifying. Jessica hadn't just targeted my family, she'd been systematically attacking vulnerable healthcare workers, possibly as practice for her campaign against me, or simply out of resentment toward successful single mothers. What happened to those other nurses? 2 of them were cleared after brief investigations, but the stress of the false accusations contributed to one of them leaving her position and relocating to another state. The 3rd nurse is still dealing with the aftermath of the complaint, even though it was determined to be unfounded. Jessica's actions had destroyed at least one innocent person's career and had caused serious professional damage to others who had never done anything to harm her. Janet, what are the legal implications of what Jessica did? Filing false professional complaints is a serious crime, especially when it's done with intent to damage someone's livelihood. Attempting to access confidential employment records and impersonate employees for fraudulent purposes are federal offenses. Your sister is facing potential charges that could result in years in federal prison. Janet also explained that the hospital was considering civil action against Jessica for the costs associated with investigating her false complaints and implementing additional security measures to prevent similar attacks. We're also required to report these activities to federal authorities because healthcare employment records are protected under multiple federal privacy laws. The FBI will likely become involved in investigating her attempts to access confidential medical employment information. I left Janet's office with a much clearer understanding of how close Jessica had come to destroying not just my family, but my entire professional life. Her campaign had been even more comprehensive and malicious than I had realized, targeting every aspect of my ability to provide stability and security for Sophie. But I also left with the knowledge that Jessica's pattern of attacking multiple victims would strengthen the criminal case against her. She wasn't just a family member who had made poor choices, she was a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable people for psychological and professional destruction. That evening, I sat Sophie down to explain what we had discovered about the scope of Jessica's campaign against our family. Sophie needed to understand that the Christmas dinner exclusion had been just one element of a much larger attack designed to damage her future prospects and our family's stability. "Mom, why would Aunt Jessica do all this?" Sophie asked, her voice small and confused. "I never did anything to hurt her or Tyler." "Jessica's actions weren't about anything you did or didn't do," I explained. "They were about her own psychological problems and her inability to deal with her feelings of inadequacy and jealousy. She chose to handle those feelings by attacking innocent people instead of getting help for herself." "Is she going to prison?" "She's going to face serious criminal charges, and she'll have to deal with the consequences of her choices. But more importantly, for us, she's not going to be able to hurt you anymore. The legal system is going to protect you from any further harassment or manipulation." As I tucked Sophie into bed that night, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that we had discovered and stopped Jessica's campaign before it could achieve its destructive goals. Sadness that my daughter had to learn such harsh lessons about how adults could betray trust and hurt innocent people for selfish reasons. But I also felt proud of Sophie's resilience and strength throughout this ordeal. She had maintained her dignity and kindness even while being systematically attacked by someone who should have protected and supported her. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Margaret Chen, the guidance counselor at Sophie's high school. Her voice was warm but concerned as she asked if I could meet with her later that day to discuss some unusual inquiries the school had received about Sophie. I arrived at the high school that afternoon with a growing sense of dread about what I might learn. Margaret met me in her office, a comfortable space filled with college brochures and motivational posters that usually made me feel hopeful about Sophie's future. "Regina, I wanted to speak with you because we've received several concerning communications about Sophie over the past few weeks, and I thought you should be aware of them." She pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be multiple documents and printed emails. 3 weeks ago, we received a phone call from someone claiming to be a concerned family member, reporting that Sophie might be experiencing emotional problems related to family instability. The caller suggested that Sophie's academic performance might be artificially inflated and that we should monitor her more closely for signs of stress or dishonesty. My stomach dropped. Who made this call? The caller identified herself as Jessica Patterson, Sophie's aunt. She claimed she was worried about Sophie's well-being because of your demanding work schedule and the pressures of single parenthood. She suggested that Sophie might need additional counseling or supervision. What did you tell her? I explained that we couldn't discuss individual student matters with family members without proper authorization and that our experience with Sophie had been entirely positive. She seemed frustrated by this response and asked whether we had proper procedures for identifying students who might be hiding problems at home. Margaret showed me notes from the phone conversation which revealed that Jessica had been fishing for information about Sophie's emotional state, academic performance, and college prospects. We also received a written complaint suggesting that Sophie's college recommendation letters might not accurately reflect her character, and that colleges should be made aware of potential family issues that could affect her academic success. A written complaint to colleges. The complaint was sent to our main office with copies addressed to the admissions departments of all 3 universities where Sophie has been accepted. It contained allegations about unstable home environment, lack of proper supervision, and questions about Sophie's emotional maturity and readiness for college independence. I felt sick realizing that Jessica had been trying to sabotage Sophie's college acceptances through false reports to university admissions departments. Did you forward these complaints to the colleges? Absolutely not. The allegations were inconsistent with everything we know about Sophie and your family, and the complaint contained information that could only have come from someone trying to damage Sophie's prospects rather than genuinely concerned about her welfare. Margaret explained that the school had been suspicious of Jessica's motives from the beginning because her allegations contradicted their direct experience with both Sophie and me as involved, responsible family members. But there's something else you should know. We've learned that similar complaints were made about other students in our district, all high-achieving seniors from single-parent families. The pattern of targeting successful students from vulnerable family situations was becoming clear. We compared notes with counselors at other schools and discovered that someone matching your sister's description had contacted multiple schools with similar concerns about their top students. The complaints all followed the same pattern questions about family stability, suggestions that academic achievements might be inflated, and recommendations for increased monitoring of the students. How many other families were targeted? At least 4 that we've identified so far. All single mothers, all high-achieving students, all families where the mothers work in demanding professional careers. Margaret showed me a summary that the district counselors had prepared documenting the pattern of harassment targeting successful families. The scope of Jessica's community campaign was far broader than I had imagined. We've reported these activities to the district administration and to local law enforcement as a pattern of harassment targeting minors. This appears to be systematic stalking behavior rather than legitimate concerns about student welfare. What has been the response from the community? Actually, quite positive for the targeted families. Once we started comparing notes about these suspicious complaints, community members who know these families personally began reaching out to offer support and share their own experiences with similar harassment. Margaret explained that Jessica's campaign had backfired spectacularly. Instead of damaging the reputations of the targeted families, her obvious lies and malicious intent had strengthened community support for the victims. Parents who know Sophie personally were offended by the suggestion that such a respectful, hardworking teenager could be problematic. Teachers who have worked with her were insulted by the implication that they couldn't accurately assess student character. College counselors who have written recommendation letters were angry that their professional judgment was being questioned. Has anyone come forward with information about Jessica's activities? Several people have reported suspicious conversations with her over the past few months. Your pastor mentioned that she had tried to discuss concerns about your family's church attendance and Sophie's spiritual development. The manager at the bookstore where Sophie works said Jessica had asked probing questions about Sophie's work performance and attitude toward authority. The systematic nature of Jessica's community campaign was becoming clear. She'd been gathering intelligence and spreading false narratives throughout every aspect of our social and professional lives. Even Tyler's friends have come forward with information. Apparently, Jessica had been asking them to report on Sophie's social activities and behavior when the cousins were together at family events. She was using Tyler's friends to spy on Sophie. It appears so. Several teenagers mentioned that Tyler's mother had asked them unusual questions about Sophie's behavior, whether she seemed stuck up about her college plans, and whether she had ever said anything disrespectful about family members. Margaret showed me statements from several of Tyler's classmates who had been uncomfortable with Jessica's attempts to recruit them into monitoring and reporting on Sophie's activities. The good news is that this community response has actually strengthened Sophie's college prospects rather than damaging them. When word spread about the false complaints, several community leaders wrote additional letters of support for Sophie to ensure that any admissions committees would understand the true character of your family. Additional letters. Your pastor wrote a letter describing your family's positive contributions to church community. The bookstore manager wrote about Sophie's work ethic and integrity. 3 of her teachers submitted supplementary recommendations, emphasizing her character and the supportive home environment you've provided. I realized that Jessica's attempt to destroy Sophie's reputation had instead created an outpouring of community support that would actually enhance her college applications. There's one more thing, Margaret said. We've learned that the other families targeted by similar campaigns have all filed police reports. The district attorney's office is treating this as a coordinated harassment campaign targeting minors, which carries serious criminal penalties. How are the other affected students doing? They're all doing well, actually. Like Sophie, they've shown remarkable resilience in the face of adult harassment. And like your family, they've discovered strong community support they might not have realized they had. I left the school that afternoon with a completely different perspective on our situation. What I had initially seen as a family crisis had actually become an opportunity for our community to demonstrate its values and protect vulnerable families from malicious attacks. Jessica's campaign had exposed her own character while strengthening the bonds between our family and the people who actually knew and cared about us. Instead of isolating us, her attacks had revealed the depth of support available to families who were contributing positively to their communities. That evening, I received a call from Detective Martinez requesting a meeting to review additional evidence that had emerged during the investigation of Jessica's activities. She asked me to bring Sophie to the police station the next afternoon, explaining that they needed to document the psychological impact of Jessica's harassment campaign for the criminal charges. When Sophie and I arrived at the police station, Detective Martinez introduced us to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases involving the psychological abuse of minors. Dr. Rodriguez would be evaluating the emotional harm caused by Jessica's systematic manipulation and documenting it for use in criminal proceedings. Sophie, I know this has been a difficult experience for you, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. What we're going to do today is talk about what happened and how it affected you so that the legal system can understand the full impact of your aunt's actions. During the interview, Sophie described the Christmas dinner exclusion in detail, explaining how the rejection had made her feel and how it had affected her sense of safety and belonging within our extended family. Dr. Rodriguez asked careful questions about Sophie's emotional state, her sleep patterns, her academic performance, and her social relationships since the incident. Dr. Rodriguez. Sophie said at one point, "What I don't understand is why Aunt Jessica thought hurting me would somehow help Tyler. Even if she succeeded in making me feel bad about myself, how would that make Tyler's life better?" Dr. Rodriguez explained that Jessica's behavior represented a psychological condition where someone tries to elevate their own status or that of their children by diminishing others rather than working to improve their actual circumstances. Your aunt appears to have believed that your success was somehow taking away opportunities from Tyler, when in reality your achievements had no impact on Tyler's potential for success. She was operating from a mindset of scarcity rather than abundance, believing that there wasn't enough success or family love to go around. While Sophie was being interviewed, Detective Martinez showed me additional evidence that had been gathered during the investigation of Jessica's activities. The scope of documentation was overwhelming and disturbing. We've obtained warrants for Jessica's phone records, email accounts, and social media activity, Detective Martinez explained. What we found confirms that this was a premeditated, systematic campaign that had been planned for months. She showed me printed copies of text messages Jessica had sent to various family members, carefully worded to plant seeds of doubt about Sophie's character and my parenting abilities. The messages revealed a calculated progression from subtle hints to more direct accusations, all designed to gradually shift family perceptions without triggering immediate suspicion. She also maintained detailed notes on her phone about your family's activities, schedules, and vulnerabilities. We found lists of your work schedule, Sophie's school activities, your parents' medical appointments, and even notes about your financial situation. The documentation revealed that Jessica had been conducting surveillance of our family's daily routines and using that information to plan her attacks with maximum psychological impact. We also found evidence that she had been researching legal procedures for challenging child custody and reporting parents to social services for neglect. She had downloaded forms for filing complaints with Child Protective Services and had been gathering what she believed was evidence to support claims that you were an unfit parent. The revelation that Jessica had been planning to involve child welfare authorities in her campaign against our family was particularly chilling. She had been prepared to weaponize government agencies designed to protect children in order to damage an innocent family. Detective Martinez, did she actually file any reports with CPS? She made preliminary inquiries about the reporting process, but she hadn't filed formal complaints yet. We believe she was waiting to gather more apparent evidence before initiating that phase of her campaign. Detective Martinez also revealed that the investigation had uncovered Jessica's financial activities related to the theft of family jewelry and her attempts to manipulate my parents' estate planning. We traced the stolen jewelry to a pawn shop across the state line where Jessica sold 3 pieces for significantly below their actual value. The pawn shop owner has confirmed her identity and provided documentation of the transactions. She sold them. She sold the pearls and 1 ring, but she kept the antique bracelet and gave it to her daughter. We have photographs of her daughter wearing the stolen jewelry at public events, which provides clear evidence of the theft. Detective Martinez explained that Jessica's disposal of the stolen jewelry demonstrated consciousness of guilt and intent to permanently deprive my family of the property, which elevated the charges from simple theft to more serious felony charges. We also discovered that she had been researching estate planning procedures and inheritance laws, specifically looking for ways to challenge wills and exclude family members from inheritances. Her internet search history shows months of research into legal strategies for disinheriting relatives. The investigation had also revealed the technology-based aspects of Jessica's harassment campaign. We found spyware on Sophie's phone that had been installed without her knowledge or consent. The software was sophisticated commercial-grade surveillance technology that gave Jessica access to Sophie's location messages, phone calls, and even her internet activity. How did she install spyware on Sophie's phone? She convinced your parents to authorize the installation by claiming it was a family safety app that would help them stay connected with Sophie when you were working. Your parents innocently allowed her to install what they thought was a legitimate family tracking application. The spyware revelation explained how Jessica had been able to coordinate her attacks with such precise timing. She had been monitoring our private communications and using that intelligence to plan her psychological assaults for maximum emotional damage. The spyware also recorded Sophie's phone conversations, including her emotional responses to the Christmas dinner exclusion, and her private conversations with friends about how the rejection had affected her. Jessica was essentially conducting electronic surveillance of a minor child for the purpose of psychological manipulation. Dr. Rodriguez rejoined our conversation after completing Sophie's interview, carrying a comprehensive assessment of the psychological impact of Jessica's harassment campaign. Sophie has shown remarkable resilience throughout this ordeal, Dr. Rodriguez reported. However, the systematic nature of the psychological abuse has created measurable trauma responses, including hypervigilance anxiety about family relationships and difficulty trusting adult authority figures. Will she recover fully from these effects? With appropriate support and counseling, yes. Sophie has strong coping mechanisms and a secure attachment with you that will help her heal from this experience. But the deliberate targeting of a minor child with systematic psychological manipulation represents serious criminal behavior that warrants significant legal consequences. Dr. Rodriguez explained that her evaluation would be included in the criminal case against Jessica, providing expert documentation of the harm caused by the harassment campaign and supporting enhanced charges for crimes against children. As we left the police station that afternoon, Sophie asked me a question that revealed her mature understanding of what we had been through. "Mom, do you think Aunt Jessica will ever understand why what she did was wrong? Or will she always believe that we deserve to be hurt?" I think Jessica has convinced herself that her actions were justified, and people who can rationalize hurting children are very resistant to accepting responsibility for their behavior. But Sophie, whether or not Jessica ever acknowledges what she did, you and I know the truth about who you are and what you deserve from the people who are supposed to love you. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom watching Jessica face the consequences of her systematic campaign against my family. She had been arrested on multiple felony charges, including theft, fraud, elder abuse, stalking, and child endangerment related to the illegal surveillance of Sophie. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case documenting the scope and premeditation of Jessica's activities. The evidence included the stolen jewelry, the fraudulent legal documents, the spyware on Sophie's phone, the false professional complaints, and the psychological evaluation documenting the harm caused to Sophie. But the most powerful moment of the proceedings came when other families stepped forward to describe their own experiences with Jessica's harassment campaigns. 3 other mothers testified about similar attacks on their children and their own professional reputations. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse practitioner, described how Jessica had filed false complaints with the state licensing board claiming that Sarah's divorce was affecting her medical judgment and patient care. The investigation had taken 6 months to resolve and had cost Sarah thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend her professional reputation. Linda Vasquez, an attorney, testified that Jessica had contacted Linda's law firm, claiming that Linda was experiencing mental health problems that were affecting her legal work. Jessica had posed as a concerned family friend and had tried to access information about Linda's caseload and client relationships. Dr. Patricia Williams, a high school principal, described how Jessica had attempted to file complaints with the school district, claiming that Patricia was showing favoritism to her own children at the expense of other students. Jessica had tried to organize other parents to demand Patricia's removal from her position. All 3 women were single mothers with successful careers and high-achieving children. All had been targeted with systematic harassment campaigns designed to damage their professional reputations and undermine their children's academic prospects. The pattern evidence demonstrated that Jessica's attack on my family was part of a broader predatory behavior, targeting vulnerable families who represented what she saw as threats to her own status or her son's prospects. Judge Robert Chen, who was hearing the case, expressed particular concern about the targeting of minor children and the use of sophisticated technology to conduct illegal surveillance. Ms. Patterson, your actions represent a systematic campaign of harassment and abuse directed at innocent families and children, Judge Chen said during the sentencing phase. The premeditation and scope of your criminal behavior, particularly your targeting of minors, requires serious legal consequences. Jessica was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the stolen jewelry legal fees for all the affected families and the costs of psychological counseling for Sophie and the other targeted children. The judge also issued permanent restraining orders protecting Sophie, my parents, and me from any future contact with Jessica, and required her to participate in mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment as a condition of her probation. But the most significant aspect of the legal proceedings was the community response. The courtroom was filled with people who had come to support the affected families and to witness accountability for the harassment campaign that had targeted some of their community's most contributing members. Pastor Michael Roberts from our church spoke about the importance of protecting families who serve others through demanding careers like healthcare education and public service. He described Jessica's actions as attacks on the entire community's values and expressed support for ensuring such behavior would not be tolerated. Margaret Chen, Sophie's guidance counselor, testified about the positive impact our family had made on the school community and the importance of protecting students from adult harassment during their college preparation years. Even Linda from the grocery store attended the hearing to show support for our family and to express her disgust at someone who would deliberately hurt innocent children for personal gain. After the sentencing, Catherine Walsh, my attorney, explained the additional civil protections we had secured for Sophie and my parents. Your parents have revised all their legal documents to explicitly exclude Jessica from any inheritance or decision-making authority, Catherine reported. They've also established a formal trust fund for Sophie's education that Jessica cannot access or challenge. What about the stolen jewelry? Jessica has been ordered to return all remaining pieces immediately, and her daughter has voluntarily surrendered the bracelet she had been given. Your parents are also purchasing new pieces, specifically designated for Sophie, to ensure she receives the family heirlooms that were intended for her. Catherine also explained that the other affected families were pursuing civil lawsuits against Jessica for damages related to her harassment campaigns, and that Jessica would likely face additional financial consequences beyond the criminal penalties. The most important outcome is that Jessica will be prohibited from contacting any of the affected families for at least 5 years, and any violation of the restraining orders would result in immediate return to prison. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Sophie walked between my parents and me, surrounded by family members who were committed to protecting and supporting her future. My parents had spent weeks working to rebuild their relationship with Sophie, demonstrating through consistent actions that they understood the extent of Jessica's manipulation and were determined to make amends for their unwitting participation in her humiliation. "Mom," Sophie said as we reached our car, "I know what Aunt Jessica did was terrible, but I'm actually grateful that it happened." "Why?" "Because now I know who really loves and supports me, and I know that our family is strong enough to survive people who try to hurt us. I also know that you'll always fight for me no matter what." That evening, my parents joined Sophie and me for dinner at our house, the first time we had shared a meal together since the Christmas disaster that had started this entire ordeal. The conversation was lighter than it had been in months, filled with discussion of Sophie's college plans and our family's hopes for the future. But the most meaningful moment came when my father presented Sophie with a small wrapped package containing a new necklace he and my mother had chosen specifically for her. "Sophie, this necklace doesn't replace the family jewelry that was stolen from you," my father said. "But we wanted you to have something new that represents our commitment to supporting you and protecting you for the rest of your life. We failed you once by believing lies about you," my mother added. "We promise that will never happen again. You will always have a place at our table, and you will always be valued and cherished in this family." Sophie hugged both her grandparents, and I saw in her face the healing that comes from having secure family relationships restored and strengthened through surviving a crisis together. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, our family had settled into new rhythms and traditions that reflected the lessons we had learned about protecting and supporting each other. Sophie was thriving in her senior year of high school, and her relationship with my parents had grown stronger than ever before. My parents had made remarkable efforts to demonstrate their commitment to rebuilding trust with Sophie. They attended every one of her school events, helped her with college preparation logistics, and established weekly traditions that ensured regular connection and communication. Every Sunday afternoon, Sophie visited my parents for what they called grandmother-granddaughter time, during which my mother taught Sophie family recipes, shared stories about previous generations, and helped Sophie understand her place in our family's longer history. My father had established grandfather-granddaughter projects, during which he and Sophie worked together on practical skills like car maintenance, home repair, and financial planning. These sessions gave Sophie practical knowledge for independent living while strengthening their personal bond through shared activities. Most significantly, my parents had taken formal legal steps to ensure that Sophie's place in our family could never again be threatened by manipulation or fraud. They had revised their wills to designate Sophie as the primary beneficiary of their estate, established an educational trust fund exclusively for her college and graduate school expenses, and created legal documentation that protected her inheritance rights from any future family disputes. Sophie. My father said during one of our Sunday dinners, "Your grandmother and I want you to understand that you are not just our granddaughter by blood. You are our chosen heir, our representative to future generations, and the person we trust to carry on our family's values and traditions." But the most extraordinary development was my parents' decision to formally adopt Sophie through a special legal process that would make her their legal granddaughter as well as their biological one. We want to ensure that no one can ever again question Sophie's place in this family or her right to inherit from us, my mother explained. This adoption process creates additional legal protections that go beyond normal inheritance rights. The adoption process required court approval and psychological evaluations to ensure that it was in Sophie's best interests. Dr. Rodriguez, who had conducted Sophie's initial trauma assessment, supervised the evaluation and confirmed that the formal adoption would provide additional emotional security for Sophie while strengthening family bonds. This type of grandparent adoption is unusual, but given the circumstances of Jessica's attack on Sophie's family standing, it represents an appropriate protective measure, Dr. Rodriguez reported to the court. Sophie will benefit from the additional legal recognition of her place in the family structure. The adoption hearing took place on a sunny Thursday afternoon in family court, with Sophie dressed in the same outfit she had worn to her high school awards ceremony the previous month. Judge Martinez, who had handled Jessica's criminal case, presided over the adoption proceedings. "Sophie, do you understand that this adoption process will make your grandparents your legal guardians, as well as your biological relatives?" Judge Martinez asked. "Yes, Your Honor, and I understand that it means I'll always have legal protection and family support no matter what happens in the future." Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, do you understand that this adoption creates permanent legal responsibilities for Sophie's welfare and gives her irrevocable inheritance rights? "We understand completely," my father responded. "This adoption represents our commitment to ensuring that Sophie always has family security and support." After the brief ceremony, we celebrated at Sophie's favorite restaurant, joined by Aunt Carol Margaret Chen from the school and Dr. Rodriguez. The gathering felt like a celebration of survival and renewal, rather than just a legal milestone. That evening, Sophie and I talked about how different our lives had become since the Christmas crisis that had initially threatened to destroy our family relationships. "Mom, I've been thinking about what Dr. Rodriguez said about Aunt Jessica's psychology. Do you think she'll ever get better and understand what she did wrong?" "Jessica is receiving psychological treatment as part of her legal sentence, and I hope she'll develop insight into her behavior and find healthier ways to handle her emotions. But Sophie, whether or not Jessica changes, we've learned that we can protect ourselves from people who want to hurt us, and we've discovered how much support we have from people who genuinely care about us. I've been wondering about Tyler, too. He's lost his mother to prison, and he wasn't really responsible for what she did." Sophie's compassion for her cousin, even after everything his mother had done to hurt her, represented the kind of emotional maturity that made me proud to be her parent. "Tyler is getting counseling through the school district, and he's living with his father's parents while Jessica serves her sentence. Aunt Carol has been checking on him regularly, and from what I hear, he's starting to understand that his mother's actions weren't normal or acceptable. Do you think our family will ever be able to include Tyler again, or is that relationship permanently damaged? I think that depends on Tyler's choices as he grows up. If he's able to understand and reject his mother's behavior, and if he's willing to treat you with respect and kindness, then there might be a place for him in our family someday. But those decisions are far in the future, and they'll depend on him demonstrating that he shares our values about treating family members with love and respect. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. I hope he can learn to be different from his mother. It would be sad if Jessica's problems destroyed his relationships with everyone. As I tucked Sophie into bed that night, I reflected on how much we had both learned about resilience, family loyalty, and the importance of protecting innocent people from those who would exploit or manipulate them. Sophie had demonstrated remarkable strength throughout the crisis, maintaining her academic performance, her kind treatment of others, and her sense of self-worth, despite being targeted by systematic psychological abuse. She had emerged from the experience with deeper understanding of human nature and stronger appreciation for the people who genuinely supported her. Our family had also grown stronger through surviving Jessica's attack. My parents had learned to be more discerning about trusting family members and more protective of vulnerable relatives. I had learned the importance of documenting problems and seeking legal protection when family conflicts escalated beyond normal disagreements. Most importantly, we had all learned that true family loyalty means protecting innocent members from those who would harm them rather than enabling destructive behavior simply because it comes from relatives. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home preparing dinner, while Sophie excitedly described her first week at medical school. She had received a full academic scholarship to one of the most prestigious medical programs in the country, and her professors were already recognizing her potential for pediatric medicine. Mom, I've been thinking about specializing in child psychology after I complete my medical degree. Sophie said chopping vegetables for our salad. Working with Dr. Rodriguez during our family crisis made me realize how much I want to help children who are being hurt by adults who should be protecting them. Sophie's decision to pursue medicine had been inspired partly by watching my work as a nurse, but her interest in child protection had grown directly from her experience surviving Jessica's psychological abuse campaign. I want to be the kind of doctor who can recognize when children are being manipulated or harmed by family members and who can provide the help and protection they need. Sophie continued, I know what it feels like to be targeted by an adult who uses their position in the family to hurt innocent children. Over the past 2 years, Sophie had maintained her academic excellence while developing remarkable emotional insight and resilience. She had volunteered with organizations supporting children from troubled families, and she had even testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections against psychological abuse of minors. My parents had become Sophie's most devoted supporters and advocates attending her high school graduation, helping her move into her college dormitory and celebrating every milestone in her academic journey. The legal adoption had provided additional security, but more importantly, their consistent actions had demonstrated their unwavering commitment to supporting her success. Your grandparents called this afternoon, I told Sophie. They want to take you shopping for medical school supplies this weekend, and they're planning a celebration dinner for your entire class year. I love how they've become my biggest cheerleaders. Sophie laughed. Grandfather actually understands my organic chemistry homework better than I do sometimes. My father had discovered a talent for helping Sophie with her science coursework, and my mother had become expert at providing emotional support during the stressful periods of medical school preparation. Their relationship with Sophie had grown into something deeper and more meaningful than typical grandparent connections. The legal protections we had established for Sophie had also proven wise investments. The trust fund my parents had created for her education was covering all her medical school expenses, ensuring that she would graduate debt-free and able to choose her medical specialty based on passion rather than financial necessity. My own career had flourished in the aftermath of Jessica's failed sabotage attempts. The hospital administration's recognition of my professionalism during the crisis had led to a promotion to nursing supervisor, and I had been selected to develop new protocols for protecting healthcare workers from harassment and false professional complaints. I've been asked to speak at a national nursing conference about recognizing and responding to professional harassment campaigns. I told Sophie, Your experience helped me understand how important it is for healthcare workers to have protections against people who try to damage our careers for personal reasons. The other families who had been targeted by Jessica's harassment campaigns had also recovered and thrived. Sarah Mitchell had been promoted to chief nurse practitioner at her clinic. Linda Vasquez had opened her own successful law practice. Dr. Patricia Williams had been selected as district superintendent of schools. Jessica's attempts to destroy these accomplished women had instead strengthened their resolve and enhanced their professional reputations. Jessica herself had completed her prison sentence and was living in a supervised halfway house while participating in mandatory psychological treatment. According to court reports, she was making progress in understanding the harm her behavior had caused, but she was prohibited from contacting any of her victims for at least 3 more years. Tyler had graduated high school and was attending community college while working part-time and living with his paternal grandparents. He had written a letter of apology to Sophie through his counselor, taking responsibility for not recognizing or stopping his mother's harmful behavior. The letter had been respectful and sincere, suggesting that he was developing the kind of character that might eventually allow for cautious family reconciliation. But the most meaningful development was the strength of the relationship Sophie and I had built together through surviving the crisis. We had learned to communicate openly about difficult emotions, to support each other through challenges, and to celebrate our successes without guilt or fear of attracting negative attention. Mom, I know that what Aunt Jessica did was terrible, but I'm grateful for some of the things that came from it, Sophie said as we sat down to dinner. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, that you'll always fight to protect me, and that our family can survive people who try to hurt us. I'm proud of how you handled yourself throughout that entire ordeal, I replied. You maintained your dignity, your kindness, and your sense of self-worth, even when an adult was systematically trying to make you feel worthless. That kind of resilience will serve you well as a doctor. I also learned that success doesn't make you a target unless you're around people who are threatened by other people's achievements, Sophie added. Most people are genuinely happy when good things happen to families they care about. As we finished dinner, Sophie shared news about her medical school classmates and her excitement about the clinical rotations that would begin in her second year. Her enthusiasm for learning and helping others filled our home with positive energy and hope for the future. Dr. Rodriguez told me that children who survive psychological abuse often become especially compassionate adults because they understand what it feels like to be hurt by people who should protect them, Sophie said. She thinks my experience with Aunt Jessica might actually make me a better pediatrician because I'll be able to recognize when children are being harmed and know how to help them feel safe. That evening, as Sophie studied for her medical school exams and I caught up on nursing journals, I reflected on how completely our lives had transformed since that terrible Christmas when Jessica had tried to destroy our family bonds. What had begun as a cruel attack designed to humiliate and isolate my daughter had ultimately strengthened our family relationships, revealed the depth of community support available to us, and inspired Sophie to dedicate her career to protecting other vulnerable children. Jessica's campaign of psychological manipulation had failed completely, not just because of legal intervention, but because Sophie possessed the kind of inner strength and moral character that made her resistant to adult attempts to diminish her self-worth. The crisis had also revealed the importance of having family members who were willing to fight for what was right, rather than enabling harmful behavior for the sake of false peace. My parents' transformation from unwitting participants in Sophie's humiliation to her fiercest protectors and advocates had demonstrated the power of accountability and redemption in family relationships. Most importantly, Sophie had learned that she deserved to be treated with love, respect, and support by the adults in her life, and that she had the strength to recognize and resist anyone who tried to convince her otherwise. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought our family to this place of security, success, and mutual support. Sophie was building the foundation for a career dedicated to healing and protecting others. My parents had become the kind of grandparents every child deserves, and I had learned that sometimes the most important thing a mother can do is stand up to family bullies who target innocent children. The Christmas that had nearly broken our family had ultimately made us stronger, wiser, and more committed to treating each other with the love and respect that every family member deserves. Sometimes protecting the people you love means standing up to family members who abuse their position of trust, even when it's difficult and painful. True family loyalty means defending innocent members from those who would harm them, not enabling destructive behavior simply because it comes from relatives. When we choose courage over comfort and justice over false peace, we create the kind of family environment where everyone can thrive and feel genuinely valued. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was hurting someone you loved? What gave you the strength to choose protection over peacekeeping? Share your story in the comments below because others might be struggling with similar family dynamics and could benefit from knowing they're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach other families who might need encouragement to protect their children from family manipulation. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger relationships through accountability and love. And please share this video with anyone who might need reminding that they deserve to be treated with respect and kindness by all family members regardless of age or relationship dynamics. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember that every child deserves adults who will fight to protect their dignity, dreams, and sense of belonging in this world.